they've been very good enough to give me some time to talk about evolution. So it's fun to watch the light bulbs go on with the young people versus the light bulb go off when you're talking to somebody who's 65 years old and a white American, Protestant.
Yeah, it gives you hope, I'm sure. It gives you so much hope. The proceeds of this monetized episode are going towards I Am Dying Out Loud. Find out more in the description. Dr. Jon Peters, thank you so much for joining me for Growing Up Fundie. First of all, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty darn good. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. For anybody listening who doesn't know, we actually met at the Secular Student Alliance conference in St. Louis. Well, oh man, I guess that was back in June now. That was a few months ago.
It was on Father's Day, actually. I need to talk to him about that.
Oh, that's right. It was. I totally forgot about that. And you not only presented there, but you also put me in touch with people who have since been on the podcast, which was really, really cool. But I wanted to get a chance to talk to you more about your background. So how does one go from being a devout evangelical, and how long were you an evangelical, to a doctor who is out here actively fighting evangelical ideas and ideology? How did you go from one to the other?
Well, just like a lot of other high school kids at the age of 16, I was questioning life, thinking about existential questions. And so where do you go if you want to find people who are looking at meaning, purpose in life? It's philosophers and theologians. And so there's no philosophy courses in high school, but there are, if you're in Arizona, which is pretty conservative, there's a lot of evangelicals. They're very, very active. And so during that time, I got attracted to my wife at that time, and we just clicked. I mean, she's smarter than I am. She helped me get through some algebra and stuff, but we clicked on a level of wanting to know life, and stuff like that. So she was one of 7 children in a Baptist family, and so basically I kind of fell into that, and my family was basically agnostic. My dad, Christian Science didn't mean a whole lot. We didn't just go to church. And so that's, I mean, I fell into a Bible church that had pastors from Dallas Theological Seminary, they had their doctorates. These were compassionate, really bright men. And so I looked up to them, I trusted them. And so within about 6 months, before I went away to college, I prayed the sinner's prayer in July of that year and accepted Jesus into my heart and did the full thing. I was a Christian. And then that involved, church Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, and Wednesdays. Later on, I ended up co-teaching a Sunday school class, and I had a great experience. I didn't leave Christianity because of a bad experience. It was great. The men were mentors to me. The social aspect, the Christianity made sense, the way they were explaining it, etc. So I became a Christian, then went off to college to study pre-med, to be a biology major with a chemistry minor. And so back then, tuition was very inexpensive. It was a state school, the University of Arizona. And then I continued my relationship with her. We continued to get closer, and I didn't have a car, so I was kind of isolated down there a little bit, but she would come down occasionally. In the meantime, she's bright enough that she graduated from high school early. And went to a kind of a prep school for medical assistants and graduated at the top of her class, and then got hired by a specialist. So at the end of my second year down at the University of Arizona, we decided to get married. And so because she had a job up there, I transferred from Tucson up to Tempe, and eventually completed a bachelor's in zoology from
Wow.
Arizona State University. During
Wow.
that time, I was, hearing a lot of creationism in the pulpit with men I really respected.
I was
And
about to ask about
then I
that.
would, yeah, and then I would go and study biology, and I'm going, wow, these two aren't mixing. So I bounced back and forth. I went to debates. I think I know I became a member of the Creation Research Society later on, because you had to have a master's degree for that. And then
Interesting.
I was doing a lot of ICR. I mean, I was really trying to make creationism work, because I knew that there was some disconnect between here. I know some people have found a way to make it work, but I was really struggling. And so
I mean this entirely non-offensively. How does a group proving creationism happened have so many master's degrees in it and still
oh,
exist?
well, there's the backfire effect, which was a research done it was published around 2010 to the lay people like me, and they found out that the more you try and push people, sometimes it backfires. They just dig their heels in, and they found out that if you have PhDs and graduate people who don't want to um, uh, come to grips with some of the facts that should cause cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
But what happens is they become better at rationalizing. They do not become better at critical thinking with the graduate.
Interesting. Hmm.
Anyway, it's called
Very
the backfire
fascinating.
effect. That's one of the aspects, is that the harder you push with evidence, the further they go away. And also, the more degrees you have, you're just better at rationalizing.
And so do you feel like that was your experience when you were in that group as well? Or was that kind of what triggered your segue into this still isn't making sense?
Yeah, I struggled for a long time. So, I think I just put things on hold. It's like my PhD is better than your PhDs, and they're very persuasive. And somebody who doesn't have a background in science, how in the world are you going to tell, which side is really the proper one? So I was writing letters to ICR people. At that time, they were in California, and now they're in Texas. And so AIG hadn't come over from Australia yet with Ken Ham. But I mean, I was trying to dig in as much as I could, but some of it involves radiometric dating and things that were not my field. And
Right.
back then, in the mid 70s, the evidence for evolution, for macroevolution and human evolution, which is what really people want, really wasn't there. It was inferred from a lot of the other studies. And so I just kind of went back and forth. And then I went to graduate school a year after I graduated, to pursue more biology. And then by that time, um, it was, I was thinking, this is just not making sense. What the
Right.
creationists were saying, if you dig hard enough, and back then there was no internet. So, I
Right.
would take 3 weeks to get a book. I'd go into the stacks and just, it's just terrible to wait. And so by the time I got into graduate school, I wasn't going to church, but there was a creationist on staff actually at Northern Arizona University. He was a botanist. And then also the, I think the academic dean of our division was I think he was a deacon in a local Baptist church, but he was a theistic evolutionist, where the other guy was a young Earth creationist. And so because of
Interesting.
that, I wasn't, I was really trying to basically see both sides, as be
Yeah.
as objective as I could. And so even after I got my master's degree, then I did a year of an adjunct professor at some community colleges, and then finally I got invited for an interview in Texas and flew over there. And I didn't think anything was going to happen. Texas wasn't going to be my favorite place, and I didn't. Everyone else came into the interview with wonderful slides and posters, and they were going to wow the
Yeah.
staff, the interview staff. Anyway, I just showed up. I figured, okay, so I got to see Houston, drive down to San Antonio area stuff. But I'm not going to get this job. So anyway, because I was so relaxed, I gave, I gave this interesting lecture on osmosis. I think that's what the topic was anyway. And I did some funny stuff, and I had them in stitches. And sure enough, I flew back, and I flew back to my friends at the college in Arizona. I said, I'm not taking that job. The city is horrible, and there's no way. And of course, I got offered the job.
Of
And
course.
of course. And so I told my wife, I said, okay, we're just going to go for 2 years. That's all I'm going to be able to handle. And then we'll go. So during that time, I was teaching biology at the college level, and it was the usual natural selection, things like that. And yes, we know that this is the way, but there was no meat to it that you could really give people like we have now.
Right.
And so again, I was kind of, I was agnostic towards religion. I wasn't against it, and I wasn't an atheist or anything like that. It's just that
Interesting.
I was just enjoying that. So you can see how long this is drawn out. And so when I was there for a couple of years, I realized that I probably was not going to get out. My then wife had a child, and she was a fundamentalist and evangelical, which I had been. Remember, she brought me into it, and then I kind of oozed out slowly over a period of time due to science. And so, and so what happened is that I looked at my future. She said, I'm not working. Evangelical wives stay home and raise the kids. And so I was earning so little at that time. I was working summers and doing everything else that I began to look for a way out, especially when if there's anybody that are PhD teachers right now, you know how hard it is. It's impossible now to get a position anywhere. And even back then, I mean, I had a tenure track position. And if I wanted to get out and apply to a job that was being advertised in the Chronicle of Higher Education, there would sometimes be 200 applications for an unadvertised position. And so I looked at that and I said, well, I'm not going to go anywhere. I love teaching. It was my passion. But I'm earning like $13,000 for a 9-month contract. If you think teachers are poorly paid now. And so anyway, while I was there, I went to a seminar given by Dr. Ryder, who was at the San Antonio Medical School, and he gave a great lecture on melatonin and sex. And so the students loved it. We loved it. And anyway, I just sent him a thank you note, and he surprisingly, he sent something back to me and said, hey, I need some research done on some ground squirrels. Do you want to help me? And so I said, sure. And so I got the students involved, and we were catching ground squirrels, and I was taking them up to the medical school where they were using them. And that ended up getting a publication out of it for me. And then plus I had a few other publications. Anyway, the reason why this is important is that after 2 years there, I realized that I'm not going to get out of this town, this part of the Texas, on my own. So what do you do if you were pre-med at one time? And we haven't discussed why I went from pre-med to biology to a biology major, but so what do you do if you're in Texas and there's 7 medical schools? Some of them are the best in the country, in the world, and there's a lot of openings. And so I basically hadn't taken any physics or chemistry courses for 10 years, but I locked myself every afternoon when I got home till 10 o'clock at night and studied using books and whatever I could. Anyway, and took the MCAT and got a very, very good score.
Wow.
And so I was going to, if I couldn't get an interview or get in, I was just going to keep teaching and just, hold my nose at where I was. By the way, the people in this town were fantastic. It's just that high crime rates and stuff. It was close to the border.
And it's also just, it's Texas.
No, there's some good parts of Texas too. There's Austin and Dallas and stuff like that. Yeah. We can talk about that if you want. Anyway, I'll tell you about the graffiti on the bathroom walls in Texas, in the men's room. But anyway, so I applied, and surprisingly, I got into all of them. And one of them was even early admission in October, where they usually don't tell you in March. So we had a little bit of money saved up, which I burned through the first year. That was a little disappointing. But I went to medical school.
And you're still married at this point?
My second wife.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Which we can talk about what happens when you become a non-believer and she's still an evangelical.
I was going to say, I imagine that was not going to end well.
It can. Actually, it can. And we can talk about that. I did a little bit of Googling on the internet before here. So we can talk about what happens in mixed marriages, because there are some that actually last. And the one that that's kind of famous for me is Dale McGowan's, and we can talk about him. He wrote the book A Guide to Atheism and stuff like that. He's a big time. He operates Only Sky, which is kind of a Patreon.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
he's the director of that, I believe now. But
That's
anyway,
awesome.
so off to medical school I went, and then graduated from there, decided to go into family medicine, and went around, did residency interviews, and ended up actually back in Arizona, which is a surprise to me. It turned out that was the best place for me. And then finished up after 3 years with that. So it's now been, 4 + 3, 7 years before you can actually start to practice. And then both my wife and I at that time were always heading towards the trees. We kind of wanted to get out of the air, out of the desert down there. Although the Sonoran Desert is the most beautiful one in the world. It's really nice, especially where we were in Scottsdale, or as some people call it, Snotsdale, because they're a little bit stuck up there.
Not still. That's hilarious.
So anyway, so I ended up in Portland, Oregon, long story short. And then for the next 10 or 15 years, I had to establish my practice. So I was working sometimes 7 days a week. And then I basically abdicated, unfortunately, raising 3 daughters to her. And she's very consistent and very logical, and she believes the Bible. And so she didn't like organized religion. So she got into homeschools, and both homeschools in while I was in medical school. And then after we moved up to Portland, she got into homeschools there. And then unfortunately there was sexual problems in both of them. People were being abused. The one in Dallas, he went to prison. So by the time this happened the second time, she was super disillusioned, but
in the church or in the
homeschooling church. But she still was very much an evangelical. In fact, she really took her Bible to believing exactly what it said. So she had the girls wearing head coverings and long dresses, that were homemade and stuff. I mean, it was really
Adam and Eve. This was your first wife?
Yeah, Adam and Eve, 6,000 years old, and the whole thing like that. But I was working 7 days a week, and basically during those 20 years, just kind of agnostic and floating. I figured evolution was true. I didn't know a lot of the new, better evidence for it. But there was a crisis that occurred in her life, some deaths in the family all in 1 year. And then we had a 4th child, and she was in her mid to late 40s, which was really pushing it, to have another child. So it overwhelmed her to try and taking care of a young child, and then still homeschooling and trying to get the kids ready to go to college and stuff. And so that caused a tremendous pressure on her. And she basically wanted to find her own voice, because she'd always grown up as an evangelical, where you support your husband and your kids, and you don't really have an identity yourself sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
And so she had a crisis of her, not a complete crisis of her faith, but she wanted to modify it. And so she ended up taking our 4th child, who was 6 at the time, and going down to a Christian great books college like St. John's, only it was run by evangelicals, which is I found out later was not the way it was presented to me. But I basically paid for her to go down there for 6 years. She was down there, and I would see her on weekends and see my 4th child on weekends. And so we were in counseling. We went through 5 or 6 counseling and thousands of dollars over 5 years to try and make something work. And the last counselor we saw was a wonderful secular Jewish woman that was one of the best counselors I've ever had. And she just turned to me one day and said that there's no hope for your marriage. And for a psychologist to say that, and by the way, we had seen this coming. When I was in residency, before we had any children, we were kind of looking at this going, this tension is going to be a problem. So we actually made an appointment during the last year of my 3-year residency, before we moved up to Portland, and got an appointment with a counselor and laid out the fact that we have 2 different worldviews. And at that time, I wasn't an activist, atheist, or anything. I was just kind of agnostic. And and he listened to all this, and then he said, "I can't help you." So that was kind of the bookend.
Whoa.
2 psychologists anyway, plus the other 5 that we spent. We tried so hard.
Yeah, and you guys made it, you said 20 years? Like, you were married for 20 years?
We were together for 37 years.
Wow. So
So
what, like
she was 19 and I was 20 when we were married, and we met
wow.
when I went to my undergraduate at the University of Arizona when I was 17, and
Yeah.
so we had been together for 3 years before that, and then I'd have to do the math again. You know what? It's probably 37 years of marriage and 40 years of we were just together during that time, and most of it was we never fought. It was really good. Maybe we should have fought because that would have brought
That's
things to
honestly, like, never fighting scares me more than fighting all the time, because at least when you're fighting all
exactly.
the time, you
And
know where
never
your
learned
brain's
how to
at.
fight, which is interesting in my second marriage because I am learning in a healthy way. Mr. Non-confrontational here, that kicking the can down the road doesn't work. So, but anyway, so that's kind of my long story of and then about my last 10 years of practice, which was like 2009, 2010. If you remember back then, the new atheists had sprung on, Harris, Dennett, Dawkins,
Mhm.
and who was the fourth one? Dennett?
Hitchens?
Huh? Hitchens, yeah.
Hitchens? Yeah.
And so right about that time, the secular community in Portland just exploded. I mean, we were having groups and meetups, and I started a group that grew from 3 of us at a kitchen table to 900 meetup members before I gave it away.
Whoa.
And so
That's a big table.
we were bringing in Dawkins and Ditch. Only 30 people usually would show up. Those were meetup members, not
Yeah.
people
That's
who were at
wild.
it. Yeah. So, but it was an exciting time. And then I bumped into all this new DNA stuff that had come out, and I went, oh my gosh, this is like it rises to the level of proof, if there's such a thing in science. And so it's they're just there's no way they're going to get around this. And I've been watching them get around everything for 40 years. But the whale fossils were coming out of Pakistan like crazy, and we've got over 200 whale fossil species now, and they all show that they're all transitional. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then the DNA evidence. And so I started on a tour of giving lectures around the Northwest about saying people need to know about this stuff because it's
Yeah.
so amazing. And then that's what I've been doing the last 10 years. And then finally I realized that, I need to get this down in book form or web form or whatever. And I started my web page, which is basically a dump out of my head. And almost none of it's original to me. I'm just like a librarian compiler. And
Yeah.
I look at my role as to try and make something complicated easy so people
Yeah.
can understand it who don't have a background in science. And when I fail at that hurts me more than anything else, fractures or
Yeah.
any of the debates I lose. So that's what my website is. It's basically a
Which I'll link in the
contra-apologetic.
comments.
Yeah, please. And so there's 2 websites. One of them is the main one, and then I started substitute teaching, and I realized that some people would want to know where this information was, and because there's a lot of religion on it, what I did was I scrubbed it clear of as much all the religion I think I could get out of it, and then I have just one that has just the scientific findings, and so there's those 2 that if you have somebody who you want to share the science without my rants about why Christianity is not true, then there's the other website. So.
And so, first, 2 questions. First, was your family at all concerned when you got involved at such a young age with somebody who was evangelical when they weren't evangelical? Were they worried about that? Did they question it? Did they not really mind? What was their response to that?
Yeah, I think they were welcoming. She is a wonderful person. She still is, and we tried for 5 years, and I don't know how many counselors to try and make it work. And I was the one who said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Especially when we were putting vacations together, and everybody else was pretending that this is happy and stuff, and I'm just kind of dying inside.
Yeah.
So I was the one who pulled the plug. She actually wanted to have something continue, even if it was kind of a business relationship. And I don't have any problems with people who do that, because sometimes there's finances or other things, and everyone's a little different. And if you're in a relationship where the two of you are just in separate bedrooms and using different parts of the house, and you want to do that for the kids or you want to do that for finances, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
But I wanted to lead an authentic life, and I
Yeah.
wanted to be, for both of us, her and me, to just kind of do whatever we have and not compromise anymore. And so
Yeah.
after 40 years of kind of compromising, so I was an active evangelical only for about 2 or 3 years. We did win the softball tournament and come back in a double elimination and had to go through the whole entire thing. And anyway, it was so much fun. And
That's
so
awesome.
but what drives me is I have to know the truth about life, even if it's uncomfortable. I don't like it. And so that there's an introduction to my webpage called The Quest. And all it is thinking back when I was 16 and just for some reason, I decided my life would be to know the truth as much as I could about things. And it's more of a curse than it is, I think,
Truly.
something to want. So that's all it's driven me.
Yeah.
And so, but I think the fact that I was 17 to 20 when that happened, and then I find out that it's really not true. Almost all the stuff is not true, whether it's science. I think that betrayal of a young person has stuck with me, and that's why, I just hosted somebody from Center for Inquiry who is going around debunking all the ghosts and pseudoscience stuff, and he was a ghost hunter at one time, and then it's a hilarious story he told about how he found out it's not true. And so his mission now is to go around and sit in on cold readings and seances and stuff and expose them. He's like the James
I was
Randi
about
of,
to say, like James Randi.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He's the new James Randi. And so, but same thing, that's his mission in life, because he got screwed as far as the truth goes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened to me. I already valued it already at 16 and 17. And then luckily I wasn't in it for very long. But I still look back at all that stuff. And plus, in order to keep our marriage going for 37 years, we compartmentalized. Like, I just turned over raising the kids and said, look, I'll support your homeschooling. And I think there was only one time when I came home and I said, take that down. And that's when she was a young earth creationist at that time. And so she had a timeline on our bonus room that started with Adam and Eve and went all the way around to present day for 6,000 years. And I go, no, you're not having that in the house. I don't know what
Yeah.
you're teaching, but that's was a red line for me. So, but most of the time I just let her do stuff anyway. And so we compartmentalized everything. And on the outside, it was a really good marriage, and probably would have continued if she hadn't had that incredible things happen in 2002.
Yeah.
But it also allowed me to grow too, because
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
once it was cut, we both could become the people that we were meant to be. And
Yeah.
if you can't grow in a marriage, why are you in the marriage?
Right, right. And people change so constantly. We have this idea that, like, oh, the human brain is done forming at 25. So after 25, you're a real adult. But I cannot even express to people how much different I am in my 30s than I ever was in my 20s. Like, if you knew me in my 20s, I don't know who that was. Like, you need to re-meet me again because I'm a different person. And so with that being said, and like these big changes going on, no longer going from being evangelical to no longer being evangelical to being an atheist, does that impact, are your kids still religious? Does that like impact your relationship with them at all? Or are they a little on the fence?
Yeah. So out of the 4 children, 3 of them are agnostics, and I use that term as a layperson. I know it has to do with knowledge and not about beliefs, and
Yeah.
that's all on my webpage. But as people use the term inappropriately and incorrectly, agnostic, definitely 3 of them are. They don't go to church. They don't read their Bibles. I mean, they're basically functioning atheists. And then the one that is the oldest, remember that unfortunately I abdicated, which is my fault, turned over the raising of the children to her to keep the marriage going. She, the oldest one, took after mom, and actually went to the same college that her mom did to graduate, this Christian Great Books college. And so how much, how much she's doing, I don't know. I'm actually estranged from her right now, but that's because she felt abandoned by
Yeah.
me as a child, which is actually totally true. It's my fault, that she got kind of shoved towards one parent and didn't get much input from me. But also when I got remarried, that just lit the fire, because she was hoping she'd have a relationship with me when I was single. At least she'd have a chance. And now
Mhm.
there was another person in there. So we're trying to work through that. And there's some grandchildren over there that she's given me that we're trying to unpack that a little bit and stuff. So
Yeah.
I never realized how common estrangements were in families until it happened to me. I go,
Yeah.
whoa, there's a great book on how to try and get back when you have adult children that you're estranged from. But so yeah, so we're working on that. But generally, I think I have except for the first one, I have a good relationship with the other three, and
Yeah.
as whatever they want to do and stuff, they know some of my passions. Hiking, downhill skiing. I'm very active as I can be
Yeah.
physically, and then also medicine. They still call me up and ask me for my opinions on things,
Yeah.
especially the fourth one. But like I say, I just can't get away from the ultimate questions, the existential questions in life. Why are we here? How do you find meaning in life? Is there any ultimate purpose? And evolution has answered most of those questions, and so that still drives me. And then all the science that's coming out is just really proves that there's only one type of creationist that you can be if you're a theist now, and that's theistic evolution, that God used evolution to create. There's no other options, whether it's reasons to believe, day age, or gap theories, or figurative
Yeah.
literature. I mean, I went through all of those, and that's one reason why I left religion, is that I could not make Genesis fit, and
Right.
I wasn't willing to water down the Bible so much that it didn't mean anything. That's not fair to the religion. I mean, you got to take it seriously and put it to the test.
Yeah. And so when you were kind of diving in, when you were deciding this is really a direction that I want to take my life in, I want to study evolution, I want to figure out where, why, how, did that bring a sense of joy to you? Or did that bring a sense of, oof, I'm about to implode my whole life by going down this path? Like which, maybe a mix of the two emotions? I feel like usually when people start to pick a direction, whether that's, atheism, agnosticism, they recognize that they're kind of blowing up bridges behind them if they do that, even though they know that's their calling and they're going to do it anyway. Did you feel that way at all? Or was it more like, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it?
Mm. That it was the timing that it happened. So I was working long hours to support her down there and to support the house up here and stuff. And the kids were in college. I mean, basically I had three kids in college. The youngest one was in a private school, a prep school. And, the tuition for all of them was like $17,000 a year. And so I had those four, plus I was paying for her education. I was just working so much that
Yeah.
that we at that time, she was really excited about the more moderate Christianity that she was being exposed to. She was becoming more accepting of
That's
homosexuality and
awesome.
for other people and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
so what happened was I'm in this fairly large house with no one. The kids are all after school. She's got the young one down in Eugene, which is like almost 2 hours away. And so I'm kind of a night owl. So I was up till 1 and 2 in the morning studying stuff. And what is this new DNA stuff? And then Bart Ehrman started publishing books. And the other door I went through at that time, so she allowed me just to have as much time as I wanted. So I was using the great courses from, I forget what they're called now, on tape. And I had a 20-minute commute. So I was hitting the tapes, learning about Christianity, where it came from. I was studying philosophy as much as I could. And so, I read 3 of Bart Ehrman's books, and that was the other door. So the first door out was science. I could not make Genesis fit the Bible and
Right.
science too.
Right.
And so then why don't you become a liberal Christian, or why don't you go to another religion? None of that fit. But then all this what had been only available if you went to seminary came out at that time. And so I ramped up and I go, oh my gosh, all this stuff they've been teaching me from the other side, 6 out of the 13 Pauline epistles are forgeries. The Gospels are anonymous. The ending of Mark has brackets around it because it's not original. The story of the woman of the well is found in older manuscripts in 2 different places. It's an addition. There's all these forgeries and contradictions and errors and adulterations, not just translation problems, but there's 4 different Bibles used around the world by Christians right now that have different canons in them, different books. Anyway, so that all just blew my mind. And so that plus the new DNA evidence that was coming out that showed that we really do have shared ancestors with the other great apes. I just like, oh, wow. And so I felt like somebody has to know about this. So that's when I went on the lecture circuit and was giving talks and stuff like that. But that happened while she was down there. So I never got I don't know, because we were in counseling and stuff trying to make it work. And she was at that time in becoming more and more assured of her Christianity, but it was much more sophisticated. She was struggling with, at one time she even told me, she says, I don't understand why there are 2 Genesis accounts, and of course we know why. There's a P and a J and which one is older and stuff. But so she was kind of bouncing some of that stuff off. But by that time I was so far into, basically being this, I'm an atheist, that I looked at that and said, you're becoming more and more biblical and set in your Christianity, and I'm becoming more and more that I can't respect your faith narrative and how you're approaching it. And at that time, I was realizing that for a lot of theists, whether they're Orthodox Jews or Muslims or whatever, they have certain beliefs that they elevate to sacred values, and then they merge them with their identities. And so any question you have of those fundamental foundational belief forms will feel physiologically like an attack. It produces kind of a flight or fight hormonal response. Yeah. And so I looked at the way we were going, and I finally said, after all these years, I said, no, we're never going to find a way to work this. And I want, I was only like 58 at the time or something. And I said, we still have our lives. And a lot of children would look at their parents and say, you guys need to be authentic and be yourselves. And that's unfortunately not the attitude I got from my 4 daughters who really didn't want to see the divorce, and neither did we. We fought it for so long. But anyway, so it happened while she was down going to school in Eugene. And so I never got a chance to sit down with her. I would love to sit down with her right now. I think she's going back. She's now attending church, which she hasn't for a long time. But I would love to know where she is and if she knows any of this stuff about her religion, because it would probably blow her mind. Because it has consequences on how you approach abortion, homosexuality. Do you brand those people as abnormal and sinners and stuff? And so, these beliefs have consequences to how you live your life. And so there's a part of me that would say, boy, I'd love to get a little email going and say, do you know what's going on with your, but it wouldn't do any good in terms of making any changes or anything like that.
Right. Right. It might hinder that you're trying to get with your oldest one a little bit.
Exactly. It's just going to hurt. And my daughters are going to go, why are you doing that? And I go, because I'm interested in the truth. So anyway, that ship has sailed probably.
And so how did you meet your second wife? Is she also atheist or agnostic?
Yeah, she was an atheist since she's like 5. She doesn't understand why we spend all this time with evangelical stuff. She goes, why are you guys wasting all your life doing all this stuff?
That's what my boyfriend says too. He was raised totally non-religious, and he's like, I've never met somebody who thinks about religion more than you, and you're an atheist. He's like, I don't know how. Yeah.
Okay, the answer is for the same reason that cancer researchers talk about cancer. That's the
Right.
answer.
Well, and
Um,
then when he finds out about interesting denominations and cults and stuff, he's just as interested in it as I am. He just didn't know that stuff existed before. And now when he hears about it, he's like, "No way. Where? Can I see? Where's the video? Where's the clip? Where's the TikTok?"
what are they
Yeah.
believing? You must be kidding. It's like, yeah, it's just, I just found out about I think it's Saint Francis, who was the Saint Paint of kids and stuff, and that the story is that on Wednesdays and Saturdays, the when he was a baby, he would pull away from the breast and not breastfeed on those 2 days, because that was what you're supposed to be doing, and that's the mythology behind that. And I'm going, wow, and it's not just Scientology. If you dig deep enough, there's some crazy beliefs down there in all of these religions. And so, but
Yeah. Yeah.
we
When I
know that.
told him about the rapture, he literally thought I
Yeah.
was making that up. He's like, "Stop
Mm.
making that up. That's nobody believes that." And I
He
had to
needs
explain to him so many people do.
he needs to listen to Hitchens, before he died, on stuff and going through the apocalyptic problems of the fundamentalists that want the world to end. They want World War III.
Yeah.
Do you really want these people in seats of power and on the Supreme Court who can't wait for Jesus to come back on the ashes of billions of people?
Yes.
There
Yes.
are consequences to
It is
belief.
very real. It is so real and rampant out there, and it's running this country.
So you are obviously in the South, and I'm up here in the atheistic land of Portland, where it's very secular. And so, getting back to the question, so I just, as my first wife and I grew apart, um, in a lot of different ways, worldviews really started to get going. So when she was down in Eugene, I thought, well, I've always had a social life through her. So I wouldn't go to church or anything, but when they had picnics and barbecues, I would show up to be social and supportive of what she was
Yeah.
doing. And so I didn't have any friends outside of church, even though I wasn't going to church.
Yeah.
So when she was down there, and I was finding out all this stuff about through Bart Ehrman and Christine Hayes at Yale, who has wonderful lectures on the Old Testament and stuff.
I'm gonna write that down too.
Um, so I decided, okay, I'm going to go out and start a secular group. Or I didn't want to start a secular group. I wanted to form one. So I ran into some secular moms in a town nearby that were non-believers, in a small town where they had a whole bunch of Christians. Where the first question is when you meet somebody is which church you go to. And so they had started a secular moms group, which wasn't really doing much of anything. In fact,
Yeah.
some of them were moving away. Anyway, I dropped in there, and they said, after just a couple of visits, I said, well, let's do stuff with the kids and education stuff. And they said, here, it's yours. And so it was a meetup site. So I just took it, renamed it, and met with two people in my kitchen table. And one was a Buddhist, another one was a humanist. And we started this group, and it grew pretty quickly. Secular Humanists of East Portland, I'd say it, at 150, I rolled it into Center for Inquire Portland and became a branch of that. But it eventually grew to 900. And when I was giving
Wow.
a presentation at my house, my current wife, who's very timid, who would never go into somebody's home. She's very introverted and empathetic, opposite of me. Just dropped in. And so she goes, well, I didn't know there were a bunch of non-believers out here working in groups. And so she reached out, and then she found out, oh, this guy's single. And so baited me. I haven't talked to her about how devious she was, about going to a movie and getting my sense on it was one of those woo movies. Anyway, and so we started dating, and then so she's rather an interesting person. She grew up in small towns where there were nothing but Christians around, and she was the only atheist and didn't know they were non-believers. By the way, most of your viewers, whether they're atheists or not, are using the wrong definition. That's on my site too. There's a wonderful little video clip of that. But remember, atheism is not someone who doesn't believe in God. That's a positive statement. And you'll get that thrown back in your face, because you can always think of a deistic God who got everything started and then went off to play cosmic golf somewhere and has nothing to do with the earth. So you can't just prove that way. So you really can't be that type of atheist. And even Dawkins says he's a 6 out of 7 atheist, and that's what he means. But if an atheist truly, the way Hitchens and Dawkins and everybody else is defining it, is someone who withholds belief because of lack of evidence. It's not that you won't
Interesting.
become, yeah, you won't become a believer. Just we need to see the evidence. And so that way it leaves it open for it, if they're going to convert you, then show us the evidence. And of course there isn't any, or we'd all be believers. And
Yeah.
so anyway, so when I say atheist, I'm using it as it's inappropriately used. And just like it's the evangelicals when they're presenting to you, they'll say, well, there's an atheist on one side and there's a theist on the other, and there's agnostic in the middle. But agnostic refers to knowledge, not belief. There
Right.
is no agnostic between that. But anyway, I don't want to get into that with most people. So I use atheist and agnostic as everyone else uses them, even though 90% of the time it's wrong. And it would be nice before you talk to anybody that you find out where their belief systems are, because they're so varied.
Yeah, interesting. And in your journey to or through atheism, through non-belief, what would you say is your proudest achievement or accomplishment in that regard?
Um, I'm not proud of it at all because it took me 15 years. What could I have been doing in my early 20s and 30s and 40s?
We'll
I
all
don't think
wonder, I
I don't
wonder
think
the same thing.
it was such a long simmering process. I was the frog in the water. And then I find out that I don't like the term atheist because it's being misused all the time. I'm definitely a non-theist.
Mm.
I mean, I guess the deistic God who's impersonal could be out there. And I'm an anti-theist when it comes to creationists running for school boards and messing young people up, especially. So, I don't, am I free thought? Yes. Am I secular? Yes. What the definitions of secular are. So I think my greatest personality defect or whatever is that I hope that I struggle so much with understanding things. I'm not the brightest cookie on the sheet. And the fact that I've gotten through with 4, degrees, college degrees, or one's an honorary degree. But the fact that I was able to do that is in part because I just work my butt off, and because I can't keep up with the really bright people, even though I do end up eventually at the top of the class. And that ended, by the way, in the second year of medical school. They give you so much stuff that you can't keep up, and so you will
Wow.
start to go down a little bit. I ended up in the top half of my class, but I was in the top quarter at the end of the first year. And this was a very difficult school. It was rated the 15th best in the country at the time. So but anyway, so I think I connect with people who don't like math, who can't get through math. I had to struggle through calculus and physics and organic
I'm the
chemistry.
worst at math.
It was
So
not
bad.
pretty. Yeah. And so I would sometimes spend an hour just on one page trying to understand the formulas or whatever. So I think I connect with people um who really struggle in that round. I do not have a super high IQ. And the reason
Ooh,
I was able to do a lot of that stuff goes back to my first wife, because remember, she took all the raising of the kids and let me have time to study and stuff and go through all this stuff and pursue a career. And it cost me relationships with my kids because
yeah.
I was not there emotionally or even physically some of the time. But if we hadn't compartmentalized that and done that, then there's no way I could have been father knows best and having talks with my kids when I should have been memorizing stuff, and especially
Yeah.
in medical school and stuff. So I mean, that's a little personal. And one thing we haven't talked about is do mixed marriages, world marriages, make it? Because ours didn't.
I
We
think
could have survived, but it would have been a hollow marriage.
Well, and I think the definition of make it depends on whether or not the answer is yes or no. For example, I dated someone within the last 5 years who was very religious, very, very religious. And, I had actually just met him right after he graduated from a Bible college, and we could have worked. He was nice, wonderful, all the things you want in a partner, except one of us would have been lying to the other. Either
Or when you had children, that's when the rubber meets the road. You can stay
Yes.
married if you don't have kids, but then you got to decide how are you going to raise the kids.
Well, and the reason I basically broke up with him was because I started to realize that even though he had told me all these things about himself in the very beginning, he was compromising on every single solitary
Mm.
belief that he held
Ooh,
just to be able to meet whatever it was I was saying. And I didn't want him to do that. I wanted him to go on his own journey and figure out who he really was. He could still be religious now. He could be an atheist now. I have no idea. But I
yeah.
knew that I was going to either negatively impact him by basically turning him into a parrot of whoever I was, and he was never gonna learn to stand on his own 2 feet, or I was just gonna stay quiet about everything I really felt, keep going to church with him just because that's what he liked to do, and secretly resent him for making me, like, stifle my feelings just to stay in that relationship, and so, I think if somebody doesn't mind keeping quiet about certain things on either side, whether they're the religious one or the non-religious one, you could probably make the relationship work, but I just don't believe that two people openly, authentically being themselves, sharing their thoughts and feelings as often as they want, being involved in whether it's YouTube channels or churches or whatever based on their beliefs, I just don't see that working for the long term.
Or like you say, not working authentically. And I think
Right.
part of a marriage is to help each other grow because you
Right.
don't stay the same. And so, now I guess psychologists are looking, we're living so long into our 90s that there's this gray divorce sweeping across the country. And I think, we grew up evolutionary wise through people that didn't live past 30. You had your
Right.
kids and a lot of them didn't live. So now they're looking at maybe serial monogamy may be a more of a viable choice for developed countries, the ones that are secular. So the old saying where your mother said you can't marry outside your faith. If you're Catholic, don't marry a Protestant. If you're Jewish, do not marry a Muslim. And they knew that it's all fun and games when you're dating and you're married for the first year or two, but when the kids come along, it really forces the issue. And so we had already had children. I know my second daughter, one time she said, "Why you guys ever decided to have children or stay together?" She says, "Well, when through our 20s and into our 30s, we were different people at that time, and the first kid didn't come along until I was 30." So
Wow.
we moved around a lot, like a lot of academics do. But I was interested, with the divorce was, I think, about the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I've had a very charmed life and
Yeah.
lived in great places, stuff like that. But the pain is still there. We, have to carry
Yeah.
those griefs forward. You can't move on.
Right.
Um, but I started to look around, and before this interview, I also did some internet searches about what if an atheist and theists, especially evangelical Christians, can make it. Because most of the people I knew, where one of them went out and the other one didn't, their marriages didn't last. And so, but I did know, again, Dale McGowan is a leader in the secular community, and he's married to a Christian. And so for about 20 years, I kept thinking, how does he make it work? And none of my friends or me could make it work. And so anyway, I ran into a YouTube that was recorded, and he was giving a presentation in front of a classroom, it looked like, and he was talking about his marriage. And his wife is a very liberal Christian. She's not a fundamentalist, and that's how
Right.
they're making it work. And
Yeah.
you look at Darwin, and Darwin's wife was a kind of a universal Unitarian, very, very liberal, and she actually helped him write and do a lot of his stuff, even though she's had a lot of doubts about it, but she still was able to support him. And so if you're married to a fundamentalist in one of the religions and you're an active atheist, I think the chance of you staying together is very, very low. But if you keep your atheism to yourself and you're not an activist, and the other person is pretty liberal in their beliefs, and then yeah, I think you can
Yeah.
you can make that work. And
Yeah, and
so
I think that's the key word there too is, like, fundamentalist and evangelical. Like,
yeah,
could you make it work with a liberal person who goes to church maybe once a month and, thinks that gays should be allowed to get married and smokes pot? Yeah, I could probably
exactly,
do that. Yeah, I
exactly.
could. But if somebody's like, "No, every word of the Bible is true," then I'm like, "Oof." We
Yeah,
just
we got a
disagree.
problem if you're gonna tell me that the universe is 6,000 years old
Yes.
and those kangaroos made it from Mount Ararat down to Australia without leaving any bones and stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're gonna have problems. And so, and especially if you wanna teach my kids that, I
Right.
joke around at 65, I was then finally ready to become a father. Like I was beginning to ask the questions, how do you raise independent, confident girls who are critical thinkers? And, if
Right.
they want to become religious on their own or become Muslims or, I have a problem with Scientology, but it's really not a religion anyway. But, if they want to become a fundamentalist and they can make a good case for it and they've evaluated both sides and stuff like that, that's fine. But, how many people do you know that accept Christianity and read the Bible first? Would you sign on to a lifelong insurance policy that's going to cost you incredible amounts and not read through it or have somebody evaluate it for you? It's like a software license, right? You just go down to the bottom line and sign on without reading it. And so I'm a Christian. And so, and how many Christians have actually read their entire Bible? Why
If
would you read?
anything,
You have your whole life to read one book, and they
right.
don't do it. They
Right. Because
trust the people in the pulpit.
well, they trust the people in the pulpit. I think secretly in the back of their mind, they're afraid what they'll read in it.
Hmm.
And then I do know a ton of Christians who have read the whole Bible, but they are all now atheists. So,
Oh
like,
yeah.
all of them who I know for a fact read the Bible cover to cover are no longer religious, mostly because of what they read in the book that didn't pan out with anything else they were being told. But
I understand seminary students. I think I've heard this twice. I hope it's not an urban legend that when you go to a really good seminary, they actually the first couple weeks say that some of you are going to drop out and not continue with your religion. So because you're going to find out how the Bible was really put together and the contradictions and stuff and errors and
interesting.
those are my 4 sections on my website: contradictions, errors, adulterations, which are interesting to read about because as ideologies crept into the Bible too. Obviously it was written at different times and stuff, and so the adulterations of the changes that some of the scribes were making and stuff are documented because they have the thing. And Josephus was changed probably by Eusebius and stuff, and so it's fascinating. But that, and then the other thing is my 4th section, besides errors, contradictions, and adulterations, is the immoral Yahweh. When I found out where Yahweh really came from and what he was doing before he became a monotheistic God, it's fascinating what the Jews did, the Hebrews, to make them their God. Anyway, and so that just blew my mind because I like history, and especially when
Yeah.
you find out how that was. So anyway, so basically, like Dawkins has said, when you read the Bible, you understand that Yahweh is basically an innocent child killer, and sometimes he tortures them first. And when you read about this, and why did he kill all the children and the firstborns in Egypt when Pharaoh was the problem? And why did he, when he killed David's son because of David and Bathsheba, why did the child suffer for a week before he finally killed it? And stuff like this. And what did an infant have to do with, anyway, so you start feeling like this Yahweh's got emotional problems in the Old Testament. He's anger, jealousy, he has remorse and regret, like he didn't know what was going to happen in the future. Anyway, you start thinking about this
Yeah.
stuff, and then I go back to when I was 17, sitting in the pulpit going, yeah, that all sounds good. I'm just, what was I thinking? I wasn't thinking.
Yeah, if you're not even old enough to drink or smoke, you probably shouldn't be old enough to determine your divine status as a
Yeah. Anyway,
spiritual.
it's
Yeah.
just fascinating that, and none of this stuff was when I'm so much older than you. There was no, there was no
Can't believe
internet, so you couldn't
70.
search this stuff. You didn't know unless you went to a theology school or something like that, where they could
Yeah.
actually get into the Greek and Hebrew and start talking about this. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of the Bible scholars are evangelicals, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
their job is to sign a statement of faith, which means they can't find anything that causes them to doubt anything, and then to basically indoctrinate as many people as they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my site's basically a contra apologetic site, and there's one with religion and one without, and they both have the science stuff. And like I say, it just hurts me when I present the DNA stuff, and then somebody says, "I don't understand that," and I go, "Oh, that's supposed to be what I'm good at," and you don't
Please
understand. You know,
Give me another chance. You know, what is fascinating to me, and I want to be respectful of your time, so let me know if you need
no,
to.
I'm retired. It's like, I want to be respectful of yours. You know,
Yeah.
probably if people don't have enough caffeine, you know, on board. They may want to go get another cup here or whatever's going on.
I was just saying that what I think is fascinating is through talking to people. We just had our 100th episode post today, so I've talked to over
Woo!
100 people.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And what I think is fascinating is some people, their moment of awakening when they realized they weren't religious anymore was a textbook or a course in college or some statistic they had to look up or some study that just, what, there's no way, and then they look more into it and then they realize this doesn't line up with anything. Or sometimes it's so simple. Sometimes it's just, one of my favorite stories I've ever heard is, I had a friend on here, she goes by Godless Granny. She was an evangelical Christian for over 40 years, married, had
Wow.
kids, everything. And one day, all it took, all, and she was devout, like worked in the church, socialized in
Yeah.
the church, was there all the time.
She
Her
wasn't a
son,
real Christian, however, because she deconverted.
right, exactly, not a real one. Um, and what did it for her was one day her son came in and he said, "You know, the ark couldn't have happened the way that they say it did." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And her son was like, "Well, all of the animals would have died from the methane and the farts. They would have suffocated and died on that boat. There's literally no way they could have survived all that fart." And she said she thought about it, and she said they lived very close to a pig farm and that just the wind from the pig farm could like
Oh,
knock you
interesting.
out. And she realized in that moment, she's like, he's right. There was
Yeah.
no ventilation on that boat. And by realizing that one part of the Bible was false, even one, you can't be a fundamentalist and say that one part of the Bible is false. She realized like the whole thing had to unravel because her son pointed out that the toxic farts would have killed all the animals. She's like, "Oh my gosh,
So,
she's
so
right."
I ran into a apologist, a young Earth creationist apologist, that was explaining that God put all the animals on a pooping schedule so that the 8 people on the ark could keep up with cleaning everything out. So they always have an answer to something, and I always encourage people to listen to these answers too, because then you'll get to see. So that brought up one thing. So there was a trigger for me, that cracked something, and I haven't found where it is. It may be in Solomon, but there were the again, this is Dallas Theological Seminary professor. He was actually a professor at that time. He just decided to go out and start a church or take over a church, Bible church. Um, anyway, he was talking about that, and he basically said it was a part of the Old Testament where God instructed somebody to go out and count all the soldiers, to do a head count on all the divisions of the armies of the Hebrews. And there are 100,000, 200,000, another 100,000, 300,000. And there was one that was like 100,050, but they were all even numbers, huge even numbers. So I went up after him and I asked him, I said, it was supposed to be a head count. How come these all came out even? And he looked at me. This is a PhD. I think he has several degrees. And he looked at me and he said, isn't that amazing? And that was the clink for me that no, if you're doing a head count, they can all come out uh, even numbers. Anyway, so that was the funny thing that clicked to me. Not
Yeah.
that there was an apple and a curse, and women were dying around the world every 2 minutes right now in childbirth because she ate an apple from a tree that was planted in the middle of the garden, so she couldn't miss it, by a talking snake. None of that clicked on me. It was, let's do a head count on the soldiers, and that's what didn't make sense.
And there's just statistically no way that it could have been even numbers every time.
No, feeding the 5,000, they're usually all numbers that are even because they never happened.
Because it's a miracle. Because it's a
Exactly.
miracle.
You don't make striped animals by mating them in front of posts. Sorry, that's in numbers, I think. People never lived to 900. Where was I? Why was I not thinking of all this stuff when I was young?
Yeah.
Trust. There's a huge gullibility complex in a lot of believers, including me back then. I just believed everything. I mean, look what happens, what the televangelists do. They're
Well, because
flying around.
if you don't believe it, then they make it sound like it's because you are weak.
It's
So
your fault.
if you start questioning that, you start to panic because you're like, oh no, I'm one of those weak doubters they were talking about from the pulpit. I'm going to pretend like I don't doubt anything. I'm just going to put this doubt in the back of my mind because the devil is clearly winning and I can't let that happen.
I was in much more intellectual churches where I didn't get that. There was no speaking in tongues or anything like that. In fact, later on, before the separation happened and things like that, she had said, I found this downtown church that's one of the conservative Presbyterians, but I guess it's Reformed. Anyway, they're very high functioning, intellectual, philosophical discussions and stuff like that, but they're still creationists. And so that's where I was going. When I debate people, it's not the low hanging fruit. I'm usually going up against some really smart PhD people who are geneticists or they're much more into the science areas that I have to teach myself. But every time I've discovered that what's really going on is it's lying for Jesus, but it's not overt lying. What they do is they lie by omission. You have to dig in and find out what they're not telling you, and what is being withheld to you when they're coming up with their excuses and rationalizations for why the Earth is 6,000 years old. They have all their reasons why radiometric dating is not correct, or why this boat could have actually worked. And there's only 20,000 kinds on there instead of 3 million species. You don't have to fit all the species in. Anyway, but it's what they don't tell you that is lying by omission. And that's why they can sound really good to their believers. And as you know, and I know probably, apologetics is defined as the defense of the faith, not defense of the truth. And so the apologetics out there are for believers. They don't they don't get anybody on their side by that. That's just so that they can come back to their church and say, I witnessed to a whole bunch of people using these techniques and blah, blah, blah.
Lies.
And things really went well.
It's not a technique, it's a lie.
Exactly. But it's for your fellow believers and you. It's to keep you in the same echo chamber, because it may work. Antony Flew at the end of his life, probably the world's most famous atheist philosopher, converted to deism. They couldn't even get him to theism, but they'll still trot him out saying, look what the evangelicals did by witnessing to him when he was maybe demented or near the end of his life.
Or he was just sick of their shit and was like, fine, all right, I'm a deist.
No, I think he was an academic and honest. I think he basically came to that by intelligent design, which I have a wonderful blog and a video on my website about all the wonderful quirks we have in our body that if this is what the creator used to create, he was drunk or on drugs when he did some of the things in our body. So it's
let's talk about periods for a second. What's that about? Huh? Like, why can't they just text me and be like, hey girl, you're not pregnant. Thanks. Hashtag your body. Wild. And I just don't understand why anybody would want to be involved in an organization where they recognize they have to omit details in order for it to continue to be true. Like, what do they gain? I get like televangelists, they make a ton of money and they're rich, and I've never thought they were actually Christians to begin with. But like scientists, people with PhDs, they're not making money off this. They're just perpetuating this idea. And that's just disturbing to me when there's like no real gain from it whatsoever.
Well, it is because, again, it's a sacred belief now, and they cannot face the fact that everything that they believe is wrong. And I think it's Daniel Dennett that says there's no way, paraphrasing it, to tell someone that they're living their life on a delusion. And so again, with the backfire effect, you just become better at rationalizing. And boy, if you dig enough, I found out with the creationists, and it takes digging, you can uncover where they either have purposely omitted something. And sometimes, they might be doing it to deceive, but I think it's just confirmation bias. They're just going out there and reading abstracts. Most of them, after they get their PhD, they never work. They go and read abstracts in offices and publish. Anybody who Googles anything knows that the young Earth creationists are all over the place. The Discovery Institute, last time I checked, it's well over a $5 million budget, but they don't do any science. They just, give lectures and have their stuff online and things like that, and go to churches.
You
So
just exist in that thought bubble where nobody
yeah.
disagrees with you on anything.
Yeah, and it's very comforting. I mean, facing the possibility that this is oblivion when you die is that's a hard thing to face. I mean, Einstein and a few other people get remembered, but you and I, after a generation or two, will be in the dustpan someplace. And so, yeah, and so I understand where that could be very scary to attend
Yeah,
to. And so I don't,
absolutely.
yeah, I just wish they wouldn't, I wish they would keep it to themselves. Like say they get their PhD and except for Dr. Behe, who's at Lehigh University, a biochemist. He's the one of the complexity guys at the Discovery Institute in Intelligent Design. Most of them are not active with doing much of anything that's contributing towards science. And of course, they'll say that, well, of course, because you won't publish our stuff. And I go, well, yes, for the same reason that the astronomers don't let in the astrologers and the chemists don't let in the alchemists because it's not science, and neither
Yeah,
is creationism, except for again, you can be a theistic evolutionist like Collins and Vanema and Graham Finley. I mean, there's a lot of them out there that have their PhDs that are active and are very good scientists, but they compartmentalize. There's no God in the methods and materials. They're still just using methodological naturalism in their work. So
that's
you
wild.
can make it work by compartmentalizing and trying to split your life. But it's like I say,
But
it
which
is.
side of you are you being dishonest about? You know what I mean? Like, there's
Um,
no way that you're, like, authentically either secretly in the back of your mind, a voice is saying, "I don't know if this is true, man. It could be a
yeah, a
lie."
lot of them. I find that a lot of people that I end up getting long-term debates, which is kind of a waste because it's usually me one-on-one instead of me with a whole bunch of other people watching.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of them have had something happen in their lives, either a near-death experience or out-of-body experience. Francis Collins was hiking in the Pacific Northwest and came across a frozen waterfall, and that was his emotional trigger for his Christianity would be true. And he, went off to be the head of an NIH and the Human Genome Project. The guy's amazing. He just retired. And so very good scientist and medical field and made discoveries. But his conversion was a lot of emotion. And I don't know if I don't think he had read the Bible all the way through and knew about all this stuff before he committed. And so I find the ones that are the most aggressive towards me and really getting angry at my discussion of evolution, if you ask them enough, there's a reason back there. There's cancer, health, something happened to them that
Yes.
triggered them. And they tried that on me too. They go, what happened to you that you're so anti-Christianity? And I go, read my website. I decided at 16 I was going to search after the truth, and I got betrayed, and I've been mad ever since. And if you can show me where I'm wrong, please, that's how you grow. In fact, you grow more when you make mistakes. And
Yeah.
I have had to take a couple things down that I had posted, which were not true, that were pointed out. So I've changed my worldview once. We'll change
Mhm.
it gladly again for evidence.
Mhm.
But Christianity and Islam and Orthodox Judaism and Hinduism, none of them are true. They're all based on mythology. And that's the truth. And so this is our only life. And it's interesting. I have also a blog on worldviews, and it turns out the best societies to live in around the globe are the ones that have secular humanism, the Scandinavian countries, Japan, stuff
Yep.
like that. And
Yep.
then guess where the best states are to live in the United States?
The blue
It's
ones?
not the Bible Belt, which is also called the Porn Belt and the STD Belt and stuff. And a lot of that is that's confounding due to poverty. And
Yeah.
and so you can't necessarily blame religion on that, but it's certainly correlated with it, even if it's not a causation. There's a reason why Portland, Oregon, is a great place to live, because there's so few religion up here.
Yeah. Well,
However, if the same brain problems are there, whatever causes people to be drawn to religion, guess what happens in secular Portland, Oregon? When they get out of religion, they get into New Age beliefs and homeopathy and stuff like that. So the brain likes to take shortcuts, and it likes to see patterns where there are no patterns, which is why people lose money in the stock market. And also, we apply agency to things that are not causative. And that's been a selective advantage to us, because when you're in a social species like we are, you have to know who has your back or not. You have to be able to read that and know who's the agent who could, kill me in my sleep and take my wife and kids or do whatever. So we are wired for applying agency that is really not true. Gossip. And we're also wired to see patterns that are not true. If the grass rustles, could be the wind or it could be a leopard. What are you going to do? If you make a mistake, your lunch. So you tend to go one direction to run away and then waste a few calories, but it's a false positive. So anyway, evolutionary psychology explains a lot of where we are. It's almost like evolution is really important to how we live.
Almost. I'll
Almost.
believe it when I see it. No, my favorite, my favorite theory that you were talking about is that poop schedule one, that bathroom. As somebody who has a dog and 10 parrots, I can tell you there is no such thing as a poop schedule. There is not. It will not work. If they want to come to my house and show me how it works, they will change my life.
That's another thing that creationists do, is they'll throw out a possibility. It's like the recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is this huge nerve that runs from your brain, and two of them go right to the top of the larynx and two of them go to the bottom of the larynx, but the bottom ones go all the way down to your heart and come back up. It's called recurrent because it's going back against the other way. In a giraffe, it's 14 feet long. In a dinosaur, think of those long-necked dinosaurs.
Yeah.
The nerve runs all the way down to the heart and then comes all the way back up. It's like driving from Tennessee to Portland, Oregon by going the way of Brazil. It's like, why would you do that? Anyway, so the reason why that happened, it's on my website, it's because we evolved from fish. And as they started to develop a neck, the nerve got trapped underneath the gill arch, and natural selection can't make a new nerve, it just stretched it. So, but their explanations are that it's a developmental constraint, that the embryo has to have it that way or you don't develop right. Or there's a neurosurgeon, besides the one that we all know from the politics that's a creationist and stuff, that stated that, well, it's a early warning sign, because if you have a cancer in your neck, that you'll lose your voice, and so the surgeon will know that there's a cancer. They'll come to the doctors. So I go, well, that doesn't make sense. Does that mean the nerve that runs from my sacrum all the way down my big toe is a early warning sign for cancer in your leg? Anyway, so they have all this, but in theology, you can throw out possibilities. And as long as one of the possibilities works, you turn your brain off. And that's what the creationists do. They come up with these possibilities. But if you're a scientist, and these guys are PhDs, but they forgot to be scientists, how do you test a hypothesis? So if this is a developmental constraint that people have to have it, you go to Google and I'll put you on the spot here. What would you do if you were going to test where everybody has to have this? It's a developmental constraint. What would you do in Google? You would Google to see if there's any people that are normal that don't have them. And guess what? They're very rare, but you can have all four nerves coming right off the vagus nerve.
Really?
It's a little window into how the creationists, even with PhDs, are thinking like theologians and not like scientists. Because why have we had 3,000 gods? Why are there 40,000 Protestant sects? Because all you have to do is come up with a possibility, and you never test your possibilities, because in theology, most of the time you can't.
And it's supposed to be faith.
Yeah.
Right. If you test it, that means your faith is being tested as well, and you can't have that.
Well, it's also wonderful that they come up with explanations that are possibilities, and that's all they need is, well, maybe God did it this way, so that's good enough for me, and it doesn't matter that there's 30 other competing explanations that other people are using. It's, why would you live your life that way? That's, science tends to constrict onto one explanation. Theology goes the other way. That's why we have so many religions, and everybody's, thinking that their possibility is the right one.
Yep.
It's not a way to find truths.
No. Have you seen that meme from the Arthur cartoon where his sister looks at his keep out sign and she's like, this doesn't work against me because I can't read?
Yes, exactly.
That's kind of what it reminds me of. Like when people haven't read the Bible and they still want to argue the Bible with me, it's like, haha, your arguments don't work because I don't know any verses by heart. So you can't prove that I'm wrong.
Yep, can't prove a negative. So
Right, right.
anyway, so I've decided before I kick the bucket, I'm doing a dump of not original stuff, but if you want a condensed version, as somebody who's spent 10 years of delving into this stuff, and I will get around to eventually talking about the other religions and why they're not, or the crazy stuff you have to believe if you're going to be X. Millions of gods with the Hindus and caste system and reincarnation. But I even have a friend who was a monk in a Buddhist monastery, and he's now an atheist. And I said, why don't you stay with that? He said, no, when you get down to it, they also have superstitious beliefs and stuff. And we have Western Buddhism
Interesting.
here, which is basically psychology. And that's fine. If people want to adopt that, you can learn a lot of good things about it, but just don't delve into it too deeply, because at the bottom of all of these are crazy beliefs. When you're at the table eating the bread of Christ and drinking the wine, those do not turn into his body on the way
They
down, like
don't.
the Catholics say.
They
If you're going
don't.
to sign on the bottom line and say that you're a Catholic or a Protestant or you're a Pentecost or whatever, you've got to really believe some crazy crap. And I
Truly,
do that.
truly. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Jon Peters, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about you and your background and your thoughts and beliefs. And I'm so glad that we met at SSA Con. Thank you for agreeing to share your story with my audience. We really appreciate it.
Great. If anybody's interested, I think you're going to throw up those two websites, and
Yep.
and then people can get back with me if they find errors, or if they really want to hurt me, just tell me that I didn't explain anything well.
That's
and
that's how theists will
and
get you. They'll be like,
I
that was
hope you
confusing.
going forward into your second 100. I hope you have a wonderful time and have nothing but fascinating people to interview.
Thank you.